At the far end of England, a land of rocks and moorlands stretches itself out into a blue-green sea. Between its high headlands lie tiny, sheltering harbours where the fishing boats hide when the storms are blowing. One of these harbours is so small, and the entrance between its great stone breakwaters is so narrow that the fishermen call it the Mousehole. The people who live in these cottages around the harbour grew fond of the name, and they call their village Mousehole to this day. They say it the Cornish way, Mousehole, but you may say it as you choose. Once there lived in the village a cat whose name was Mouser. She had an old cottage with a window overlooking the harbour, an old rocking chair with patchwork cushions, and an old fisherman named Tom. Tom was very well behaved. He never spilled cream when he was filling her saucer. He always stoked the range to a beautiful glow and rocked the rocking chair at just the right speed. He knew the exact spot behind her left ear where Mouser liked to be tickled. When Tom was not looking after Mouser, he passed the day in the most useful way possible. He took his little boat through the narrower opening between the great breakwaters and out into the blue-green sea and caught fish for Mouser's dinner. Mouser was very partial to a plate of fresh fish. In fact, she never ate anything else, but she liked a little variety. So on Mondays, they made morgy broth. On Tuesdays, they baked hake and topped it with golden mashed potatoes. On Wednesdays, they cooked kedgeree with delicious smoked ling. On Thursday, they grilled fairmaids, a mouth-watering meal. And on Friday, they fried launces with a knob of butter and a squeeze of lemon. On Saturdays, they souse-scad with vinegar and onions. And on Sundays, they made stargazy pie with prime pilchards in pastry. All in all, the days passed very pleasantly. Then one year came a terrible winter. At the far end of England, the blue-green sea turned grey and black. The great storm cat is stirring, thought Mouser as she watched at her window. The wind whined like a wild thing about the high headlands. The sea drew itself up into giant waves and flung itself against the great breakwaters. It could not get into the Mousehole, and the fishing boats sat safe as mice, but they could not get out. And because the fishermen could not fish, there was no more food. They ate up all the few vegetables that were left in the storm-racked gardens. They ate up all the salted pilchards that were left in the cellars. Soon there was nothing left, and people grew very hungry. Mouser sat by her window, staring out at the storm, and thought longingly of morgy broth and stargazy pie. Every day the fishermen gathered on the quayside, and sometimes they would try to take out a boat through the Mousehole. But always the great storm cat lay in wait for them, and they were lucky to escape with their lives. Then at last one evening, as old Tom sat with Mouser on his knee, she felt him take a deep sigh. "Mouser, me handsome," for he was a courteous and well-spoken man. "Mouser, me handsome, it will soon be Christmas, and no man can stand by at Christmas and see the children starve. Someone must go fishing come what may, and I think it must be me. It cannot be the young men, for they have wives and children, and the mothers to weep for them if they do not return. but my wife and parents are dead long since, and my children are grown and gone." Mouser purred to tell him that she understood, for it was the same with her. "I shall go out tomorrow, Mouser, me handsome," said the old man, "and I shall not come back without a catch." Mouser purred louder to tell him that she would go with him. For he was only a man, she thought, and men were like mice in the paws of the great storm cat. The next morning they set out very early. Before they went, Tom stoked up the old range and damped it down so that it would burn steadily until they returned. Then he hung a lamp in the window so that it would shine out across the harbour and light their way. As they reached the quayside, Mouser looked back through the wind and the rain and thought how warm and welcoming the window looked. Soon their little boat was crossing the harbour towards the Mousehole Gap, and the voice of the great storm cat rose all around them like a giant caterwauling. As she listened to his wailing, Mouser felt a sudden, strange sadness for him. How lonely he must be, she thought, endlessly hunting the mice men in the deeps of the darkness and never returning to the rosy glow of a red-hot range. And her kind heart was moved to comfort him. Many a tomcat had Mouser tamed in her time with the sweetness of her singing. Now she lifted her head and sang like a siren, joining her call with the cry of the great storm cat. And so it was that he was taken off guard as the little boat made its bid for freedom. Soothed by the sweetness of Mouser's serenade, the great storm cat paused in his prowling and pulled back his giant cat's paw for a mere moment. Swiftly the little boat passed through the Mousehole and out into the open sea. The great storm cat played with them as a cat plays with a mouse. He would let them loose for a little as they fought their way towards the fishing grounds. Then down would come his giant cat's paw in a flurry of foam and water. But he did not get straight to sink them, or that would have spoiled the sport. When they reached the fishing grounds, the sea was so rough that it was hard to put out the nets, so Mouser sang again, longer and louder than she ever sung before. And again, the great storm cat paused in his play and sang with her until the nets were safely shot. All the day they fished in a seething sea. The waves were so high and the clouds so low that they soon lost sight of shore. As evening came down, they hauled in the nets. Into the belly of the boat tumbled ling and launces, scad, hake and fair maids, enough fish for the whole cauldron of Morgie broth, enough pilchards for 100 stargazy pies. "Mouser, me handsome, we are saved," said old Tom, "if we can bring back this whole home to harbour." But Mouser knew that the great storm cat would strike when he saw them run for the shelter of the Mousehole. "It is his meal or mine," thought Mouser, as she looked at the floundering fish in the belly of the boat. Blue, green and silver they glistened in the greyness. It made her mouth water to look at them. As she thought of the Morgie broth murmuring on top of the range, the stargazy pie growing golden in the oven, Mouser began to purr. And her purring rose like a hymn to home above the noise of the great storm cat's howling. Such music has not reached the ears of the great storm cat since the dawn of time. For when do cats purr out in the wind and the darkness? Puzzled, he paused in his howling, bending his ear to catch the strange sound. It seemed to him that he once heard such a song long before, when he was no more than a storm kitten. The great storm cat grew quiet. Gone was his hunger for hunting, and for making the meal of them. Only the pleasure of the purring remained. Then the great storm cat began to purr with Mouser. And as the soft sound grew, the winds waned and the waves weakened, and the little boat sailed back across the slackening sea. As they came in sight of home, a strange sight met their eyes. The whole village of Mousehole was shining with light, and lanterns gleamed along both arms of the harbour. For when the people of Mousehole had woken to find old Tom's boat missing and a light left in his window, they knew that he had gone out to find fish for them, or to perish in the deep water. There was a great deal of cooking in Mousehole that night. The people made a whole cauldron of morgy broth. They baked hake, cooked kedgeree, grilled fair maids, fried lances, and scouse scad. They baked 100 stargazy pies. Then people and cats, they feasted together until the hunger was no more than a memory. And every year since that day, at the inn at the quayside, the people of Mousehole hold a fish feast on the night before Christmas Eve and raise their glasses to the memory of old Tom. And every year, in the yard at the back of the inn, the cats of Mousehole gather and raise a great howling to the memory of old Mouser. And every year, folk come from all over Cornwall at Christmas time to see Mousehole lit up with 1,000 lights, shining their message of hope and a safe haven to all those who pass in peril of the great storm cat.